The shock was not delivered through a furious palace statement, a public confrontation, or even a warning phone call. It arrived through something far colder: silence. Meghan expected the possibility of appearing inside Wimbledon's prestigious royal box, only to discover that her access had been quietly blocked before she could even make a move. And behind that decision stood one royal figure who had apparently decided there would be no negotiation: Princess Anne. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Meghan stared at the message before asking for the wording to be repeated. She thought there had been some mistake between organizers and palace staff. But the message was clear. Princess Anne had privately instructed that Meghan was not to be included among royal guests permitted into Wimbledon's royal box. The royal box, a reserved seating area associated with distinguished guests and royal attendants, carried meaning beyond an ordinary ticket. It signaled access, status, and public closeness to the monarchy. The realization hit harder because nothing had been cancelled in public. Meghan had not been removed from a published guest list. She had been stopped before any appearance could take shape. That timing mattered. There would be no confrontation at the gates, no last-minute reversal, and no chance to challenge the decision before arrangements were settled. Silence had done the work. Prince Harry watched her place the phone face down on the table. Meghan did not raise her voice. She asked why nobody had spoken to her directly. He heard the anger, but also something deeper: humiliation. Harry knew his wife had attended Wimbledon before, and understood why this felt less like seating and more like a message about where she now stood. Anne, however, had not acted on impulse. She had already discussed royal representation, meaning the public role of those who officially act for the crown, and she believed Meghan's presence there could blur a line the family had spent years trying to define. In her mind, the issue was not tennis. It was whether a visible royal setting could be read as institutional acceptance without any formal return to duty. Meghan wanted one answer above others: what had changed? Harry could not give it to her. Anne could, and the truth did not begin at Wimbledon. It led back several weeks, to a royal gathering and one conversation the Princess Royal had never forgotten. Because Anne's decision was not born at Wimbledon at all. To understand why she closed that door, the story must first return to the two women standing on opposite sides of it. This was never simply a dispute over a tennis seat. Behind the royal box stood two women, whose relationships with monarchy had moved in completely opposite directions. Princess Anne had spent decades treating royal privilege as something earned through service and restraint. Meghan had stepped away from working royal life and built a different future beside Harry. Now those two paths had collided in one painfully public symbol, and neither woman was willing to pretend the difference meant nothing. Anne had always believed access came with obligation. For her, hierarchy was not decoration, it was the structure that kept royal duty from becoming personal advantage. Working royals, meaning family members who officially carry out duties on behalf of the monarch, were expected to accept limits along with privilege. Meghan no longer lived inside that system after leaving frontline duties with Prince Harry, yet every appearance she made near royal spaces still carried public meaning. Meghan felt that difference deeply. Wimbledon was not simply another ceremonial setting to her. She remembered attending before, remembered the ease of earlier days, and could not understand why affection for tennis had suddenly become tangled with questions of status. Anne saw the same situation in colder terms. If Meghan entered a space read as royal representation, the public might assume that nothing had changed. Harry listened as his wife spoke about happier memories. Meghan described how natural Wimbledon had once felt, then asked why a familiar place seemed guarded by invisible rules. He stayed quiet briefly before admitting that he could understand Anne's concern. The answer landed badly. Meghan looked at him, hurt more by his hesitation than by the words themselves, and asked whether he believed a seat could define who belonged. Harry did not, but he knew his aunt well enough to recognize something Meghan could not yet see. Princess Anne rarely drew a hard line to make a point. When she acted, she usually believed a principle had already been tested, and that allowing one exception would create a larger problem. That knowledge disturbed him, because it suggested the Wimbledon decision had a history neither he nor Meghan understood. Anne, meanwhile, remained convinced the boundary was necessary. She did not see herself punishing anyone. She believed she was protecting a distinction the family had spent years trying to hold. Meghan saw rejection. Anne saw duty. Harry stood between both interpretations, knowing each woman believed the other had misunderstood what was really at stake. The question now became impossible to ignore. What had happened to turn Anne's concern into a firm prohibition? The answer waited at Windsor, inside one conversation Meghan never realized had become a warning at all. Weeks before Wimbledon, there had been no shouting, no dramatic walkout, and no obvious sign that a line had just been crossed. The moment happened quietly at Windsor during a private reception, surrounded by polite conversation and careful smiles. Meghan made a remark about how powerful a Wimbledon appearance could be in reshaping public perceptions. Princess Anne heard something entirely different. To her, those few words transformed a sporting invitation into a question of royal identity. Meghan had already learned that royal spaces carried meanings far beyond the events themselves. After stepping back from official duties with Prince Harry, every appearance near the monarchy risked being read as something larger. Royal representation, meaning appearing publicly in a way that suggests someone is acting for or closely aligned with the crown, had become especially sensitive. Anne believed that distinction had to remain clear, because confusion could quickly become expectation. The conversation changed when Meghan mentioned Wimbledon. She told Anne that being seen inside the royal box could send a powerful message that family relationships were finally moving forward. The older royal did not answer immediately. Then she asked a single question. Did Meghan mean reconciliation, or did she mean royal representation? Meghan paused, before saying the public would probably see both. Anne's reaction was immediate. She set down the glass in her hand and told Meghan that those two things could not simply be treated as interchangeable. Family healing was personal. Royal status was institutional. To Anne, combining them in one highly visible appearance risked telling the public that an official restoration had happened when no such decision existed. Meghan felt the exchange harden around her. She believed Anne was turning a hopeful family gesture into a cold argument about rules. The younger woman left convinced that she had been viewed with unnecessary suspicion. Anne walked away with the opposite conclusion. She believed Meghan had unintentionally proved why clearer limits were needed. Within days, Anne requested a private discussion about future high-profile invitations linked to royal settings. The request was recorded through an internal scheduling note within the dramatized account, making clear that Wimbledon was among the events she wanted reviewed. The royal box now carried a new concern: whether personal reconciliation could be mistaken for an official return. By the time Meghan later considered attending, Anne had already reached her decision. The seat could not become the symbol of a restoration that had never formally happened. But once Meghan discovered that one conversation at Windsor had followed her all the way to Wimbledon, hurt rapidly gave way to anger, and this time, she wanted Anne to hear it directly. When Meghan finally came face-to-face with Princess Anne, the confrontation was quieter than anyone might have expected, and far more brutal because of it. There were no raised voices at first, no aides stepping between them. Just one question delivered with unmistakable hurt. Why had Anne allowed her to discover the ban through other people? The Princess Royal did not retreat. Instead, she gave an answer that turned Meghan's embarrassment into something much deeper. Meghan had insisted on speaking directly because she was tired of messages moving through other people. Prince Harry had encouraged the meeting, hoping clarity might lower the temperature, but he knew both women were walking in with different ideas of what had happened. Anne believed she was defending royal roles. Working royal representation, meaning public duties carried out on behalf of the monarch, came with privileges she felt could not simply follow someone after those duties ended. Meghan did not soften the question. She looked at Anne and asked, Why didn't you tell me yourself?" The older royal paused, folded her hands, and answered that the decision concerned the role attached to the seat, not Meghan's value as a person. That distinction only deepened the hurt. Meghan told her that such explanations might sound clean inside palace walls, but they felt cruel when applied to family. She said the royal box had become a symbol of exclusion before she had even been given a chance to understand the concern. Anne listened without interrupting, then replied that affection could not automatically restore privileges linked to official royal service. Anne's calmness made the argument sharper. She insisted she was not trying to humiliate Meghan, and she was not attempting to erase her connection to the family. Meghan answered that intention did not change impact. If everyone else understood the decision before she did, then humiliation was already built into the process. Then came the detail Meghan had not expected. Anne explained that the instruction had never been a ban from Wimbledon itself. Meghan could attend the tournament privately if arrangements allowed. The restriction concerned entry into the royal box through royal sponsorship or invitation, because that space could be interpreted as an official signal from the family. Meghan fell quiet. The distinction changed the shape of the confrontation, but it did not end it. Instead, it created an even larger question. If Anne had not issued a formal public ban, how had one quiet instruction become powerful enough to close the door anyway? Meghan had challenged the woman behind the decision. Now attention shifted toward the machinery behind her, and toward just how much authority Anne had quietly accumulated. Princess Anne did not need a throne, a press conference, or a dramatic palace decree to make herself heard. Her influence worked differently. Decades of service had given her something harder to measure but impossible to ignore: credibility. When Anne said a royal boundary mattered, people listened. And in the Wimbledon dispute, Meghan was beginning to discover that the Princess Royal's greatest power was not the ability to command. It was the ability to persuade, without appearing to command at all. Anne knew the royal box was not hers to control alone. Wimbledon invitations could involve organizers, hosts, personal guests, palace coordination, and royal patronage, meaning the formal support or association a senior royal gives to an institution. That complexity mattered. She could not simply claim ownership of the seats. What she could do was make her concerns known through the channels trusted to handle royal attendance. Charles received those concerns in a short private briefing. The king read the paper once, removed his glasses, and placed it down without speaking. Then he asked one question: was she excluded from Wimbledon, or from representing the family there? The difference mattered, because one was personal access, while the other touched the public meaning of royal status. Charles listened carefully when the answer came back. Meghan had not been banned from the tournament itself. The issue was whether she should appear in the royal box through a royal connection that could be read as official endorsement. He was troubled by the hurt already caused, but he also knew that reversing Anne's position could create a fresh wave of confusion over who represented the monarchy and who did not. Harry felt that decision immediately. He had hoped his father might step in, soften the message, or at least challenge the way it had been handled. Instead, the monarch refused to overturn it. Harry found himself trapped between defending Meghan and recognizing that the family saw the royal box as institutional territory, not simply a place where relatives could sit together. Anne later faced the question directly when Charles asked whether the restriction had been intended as punishment. She answered in a private conversation, leaving no doubt about her reasoning. "No," she said. "It was a boundary, and boundaries only become humiliating when people pretend they do not exist." Charles did not reverse the decision. Harry understood what that meant. Meghan understood it too. No public decree had been issued, yet the message was now stronger than ever. Outside palace walls, Wimbledon preparations continued as if nothing had happened. The machinery had spoken without issuing a single formal decree, leaving Meghan to confront the hardest part of all: watching the event arrive without her place in it. Then, Wimbledon arrived. The gates opened, spectators filled the grounds, familiar faces appeared around center court, and Meghan was nowhere near the royal box. What had begun as a quiet instruction inside royal circles had become visible simply because the tournament continued without her. No announcement was necessary. No palace official needed to explain anything. For Meghan, that silence was almost worse, because every ordinary moment of the day seemed to confirm that Anne's boundary had held. Meghan watched part of the coverage privately, telling herself she would not let one decision control her mood. The royal box, a reserved seating area closely associated with distinguished guests and royal attendants, appeared briefly during the broadcast. She lowered the volume almost immediately. The tournament carried on with its usual rhythm, while palace staff quietly worked to prevent the disagreement from becoming a public spectacle. Harry noticed the change in her before she said anything. Meghan stood, left the room, and gave no explanation. He followed and told her he hated seeing an institution turn family relationships into symbols. She answered that the deepest wound was not missing a tennis match. It was hearing herself discussed as a category, a status, a problem to manage, rather than as a person someone could simply speak to. Anne felt no sense of victory. Princess Anne had never intended the decision to become a public humiliation, and she refused to discuss Meghan publicly once the tournament began. That silence reflected how she viewed the matter. Settled protocol, not personal punishment. Protocol, in this context, meant the accepted rules and customs governing royal conduct and public roles. The weight still reached her. After hearing how deeply Meghan had taken the exclusion, Anne admitted in a private family conversation that necessary choices could still hurt people. She did not withdraw her position, but neither did she celebrate it. The distinction mattered because firmness and cruelty were not the same thing in her mind. Harry slowly understood the trap. Even if he forced a reversal tomorrow, Meghan's presence would still raise the same question. Was she attending privately, or was the family publicly restoring a royal role she no longer held? A different seat could not erase that conflict. The answer had to come from somewhere deeper. Harry knew one more argument through advisors would change nothing. He needed Anne without courtiers, statements, or palace language standing between them. The public symbol could no longer be changed, but Harry still believed the meaning behind it could, and he decided to ask his aunt one question no protocol document could answer. For the first time since the dispute began, the argument stopped being about Wimbledon. Harry sat privately with Princess Anne and stripped away every institutional phrase that had made the conflict feel colder than it really was. He did not ask her to change the seating decision. He asked whether Meghan had become someone the family intended to keep permanently outside. Anne's response forced him to separate two things he had spent years treating as one: belonging to a family and representing a crown. Harry had chosen to meet his aunt without advisors, aides, or anyone else to soften the conversation. He wanted no formal language between them. The crown, meaning the institution of monarchy rather than one individual person, had become tangled with family life for so long that every decision now seemed to carry two meanings. Harry needed to know which meaning Anne had intended. He told Princess Anne the Wimbledon decision was finished. He was not there to demand another seat, another invitation, or another public correction. Then his voice tightened. "Is there still a place for us as family?" She did not answer immediately. When she finally spoke, the words were simple. Family was never the seat. Harry absorbed that slowly. From outside royal life, he admitted, every privilege removed could feel like another door closing. Each decision seemed personal, even when the palace insisted it was institutional. Meghan felt that pain sharply because the boundaries were often explained only after they had already affected her. Anne did not dismiss the criticism. She acknowledged that the monarchy had sometimes handled boundaries badly, making people feel erased when the real intention was to define roles. But she refused to pretend those lines no longer existed. Private affection and public royal representation could not automatically become the same thing simply because the family wanted peace. Then Anne gave him the answer he had actually come to hear. She said she would welcome private reconciliation with Meghan, completely outside formal royal duties. The royal box decision was not permanent exile. It was a distinction between family contact and an official signal that could be misunderstood by the public. Harry left without the reversal he might once have fought for. But he carried something more useful back to Meghan. A way to explain what had happened without calling it victory or defeat. The ban remained unchanged, yet its meaning had shifted. And when that distinction reached Meghan, the story was finally ready to move beyond palace rooms and into the court of public opinion. By the following morning, the dispute no longer belonged to Anne, Meghan, or Harry. It belonged to everyone watching. One photograph from center court became the symbol. The royal box filled with familiar guests, while the woman once photographed there during happier royal years was conspicuously absent. Newspapers framed it as a battle over privilege. Broadcasters debated whether Anne had defended tradition or deepened a family wound. And suddenly, one missing seat carried the weight of an entire royal rupture. Meghan felt the argument change the moment the image spread. The royal box, a reserved seating area associated with distinguished guests and royal attendants, had become something larger than a place to watch tennis. Some people saw access as ceremonial privilege tied to official status. Others saw her absence as proof that damaged family relationships were being expressed through public symbols. The story hardened when a fictional morning front page appeared beneath the headline, "The Seat That Divided the Windsors." Meghan opened the image on a tablet and stared at it longer than Harry expected. Her face fell. Then she closed the screen and told him she refused to spend another day fighting over a chair. Harry heard the exhaustion in her voice and knew the fight had changed. Anne saw the same coverage and disliked what it suggested. Princess Anne had never wanted the decision presented as a victory over Meghan. In a private family conversation, she insisted that Meghan had not been banned from tennis and should not be treated as though she had been thrown out of the family. Palace communications stayed restrained, repeating only that private attendance and official royal representation were not the same thing. Harry then made the most important move of the day. Through a private message passed to the family, he said neither he nor Meghan would seek a public reversal. The couple accepted the institutional distinction, even while believing the way it had been handled caused unnecessary pain. Meghan did not pretend the hurt had vanished. Anne did not pretend the boundary had. That mattered, because the monarchy could survive disagreement more easily than ambiguity. Meghan needed dignity, without pretending her former role remained unchanged, while Anne needed boundaries, without turning them into punishment. Harry understood both pressures clearly. The public argument began losing its heat. What remained was harder and more personal. Whether this conflict would become another permanent fracture, or the moment both sides finally learned how to coexist without confusing family affection with royal status. And when the noise around the royal box finally faded, what remained was not the question of who had won, but what each of them had finally understood. In the end, Princess Anne did not reverse her decision. Meghan did not receive a last-minute invitation. Harry did not force the palace into retreat, and no dramatic public apology rewrote what happened. Yet the story did not end in total rejection either. What began as a humiliating exclusion forced everyone involved to confront a truth they had avoided for years. Leaving royal duty had changed Meghan's institutional position, but it did not have to erase every remaining family connection. Harry returned to Meghan, carrying no victory, but something more useful: clarity. Sitting together without advisors or phones between them, he repeated the sentence Anne had given him: family was never the seat. The royal box, a reserved area associated with royal guests and ceremonial status, remained closed to Meghan through royal sponsorship. She stayed quiet for a moment, then admitted she understood the distinction, even if she hated how painfully it had been delivered. Meghan chose not to demand a public apology. She would not allow one symbolic space to define every remaining connection with Harry's family. That decision was not surrender. It was a refusal to keep fighting over a seat when the deeper issue had finally been named. Anne, meanwhile, held her ground, but privately acknowledged that protecting protocol did not excuse poor communication. She admitted in a family conversation that speaking earlier might have spared unnecessary humiliation. Charles supported that final understanding. The The king accepted that leaving official royal duty meant there could be no automatic return to ceremonial privileges, meaning public honors and access linked to formal service. But he also rejected the idea that institutional boundaries required personal exile. Harry finally understood that reconciliation would have to begin privately before it could ever carry public meaning. The confrontation therefore ended without a winner. Anne preserved the line between family membership and royal service. Meghan accepted that stepping outside the institution had lasting consequences without accepting that those consequences erased her humanity. Harry stopped reading every royal restriction as proof that another family door had permanently closed. That was the real verdict. No one received everything they wanted, yet everyone left with something they had lacked before: clearer limits, less ambiguity, and a path toward contact without pretending the past had disappeared. The chair remained beyond Meghan's reach, but by the end, everyone understood that the chair was never the family, and losing access to one did not have to mean losing the other. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.